everyone, Christy Arnett here with Michael DeMichele in the studio, and we're going to talk about learning horse, because I've gotten a lot of people telling me that they want to hear from the pros how they made it from playing low-stakes horse, learning the games, to where they are today. So first of all, how did you learn horse?
Well, I got a lot of experience playing on the East Coast. You know, they had a lot of mixed games up to like the 75-150 level, and so I would just sit in when I thought the games were good, and I had a good opportunity to beat them. And through experience and through my own strategic processing in my mind, I would get better, and I'd also try to exhaust every resource on the internet that was available to me to try to get better at horse as well.
Okay, now some of the games that give a lot of people trouble are the high-low games. Mm-hmm. How do you go from always learning how to play high, because I think a lot of people have trouble with playing just high hands, but in the high-low games you need to play hands that can go both ways?
Right, well actually I think high-low games are actually one of my favorite type of games. I love Omaha 8 or better and Stud 8 or better particularly. In Omaha 8 or better, I guess the difference from Omaha high to Omaha high-low would be that when an opponent enters a pot, especially from early positions, he usually has like an ace-deuce or an ace-3 combination in his hand. So when you need to make when you need to get to showdown in the hand, you have to assess, his range, assuming that he has one of the ace-2s or ace-3s in his hand. So basically, it would kind of be like calling down against the limit hold'em hand. Like he has two random cards, would be his other two cards, and that gives you a good indicator whether or not you should be getting to showdown or not.
Okay. A question I get too is in Stud 8 or better, if you're in a multi-way pot and one of the original raisers is showing a good low, like maybe ace-4, but you have ace-2, but your nut low hand is all you've got, and there's a multi-way pot, and some people are on the high. How do you want to keep this pot small to not get quartered if in case he's also got the low, or what do you do when you just have the nut low?
Well, I think you need to have a good sense of what your equity is in the hand at all times. And of course, if you're in a 4-way pot and you think your equity is more than 25%, for instance, you should jam it. You should make the pot bigger, especially if you have an opportunity to get somebody out of the pot. Like if you can get somebody to make a fold or an incorrect fold, mm-hmm. that usually makes your equity go up so high that it's worth bloating the pot, even if you are an underdog. Like so, let's say for instance that you have that. Three-handed, your equity would be over 33%, but if you were to get the pot heads up, it would be like 45%. If you can get it heads up and only have 45%, you should try to do so. So basically, that would mean go 4 bets with your opponent if you can to try to get that third person out, so you can have that 45% equity rather than just have to play the three-way pot with 33%.
Okay. And when you're learning the games, would you suggest sitting down in some games to learn each game game by game?
Well, yeah, it's definitely good to be able to explore the game on its own. It's definitely hard to take on all the games of poker and try to learn them all at the same time. But there's a great incentive to try to develop your skills in all the games, because I really feel that learning a specific set of skills in one game translates over to other games. There are certain fundamental issues of each specific game that you really have to get down pat, and once you learn them, you start to realize that they actually apply to other games of poker, other forms that you wouldn't have otherwise known. Like things that I've learned in Raz, Stud 8 or better, apply to no limit hold'em, and I didn't learn those things in no limit hold'em, on my own while I was just playing no limit hold'em.
Right. Can you give us an example of one of those things
A good example of one of those things, bluffing at correct opportunities. Like sometimes in Raz, for instance, you can represent a specific hand, and you have to do so based on a certain mathematical principle. Like you have a made 8 low, for instance, a certain percentage of the time out of all the times you would have played this. So therefore, you're supposed to therefore you should be bluffing give or take a certain degree of time, and that translates over to no limit hold'em, like that fundamental principle. Of course, it translates over with the whole set of different a whole set of different variables to come to that conclusion of knowing when to bluff. But that solution translates over.
Kind of helps with like the poker instinct and just feel too, probably. But what about the stud games? Do you have a process for remembering all the cards that you see, because obviously that's a big advantage to be able to remember better than your opponent. So
that is important.
So what kind of process do you go through to try and help yourself remember?
Well, I think people make a bigger deal than necessary about how important it is to remember cards and stud. It is really important, but people seem to think that that's like the most important thing. But anyway, it's actually really hard for me to memorize cards and stud because I have such a bad memory. Actually, I'm good at analyzing things, but I can't remember 2 minutes in the past. So the way that I like to try to memorize the cards, I just like to sort them chronologically, and if there's like 2 3s and there's a 1 2 and an ace and there's a 10 showing, I like to say ace 2 3 3 10 in my head, and then I try to memorize how many dead suits there are. And I try to memorize if there's the ace the ace dead or not, because that's more important than memorizing whether or not there's a 4 of hearts as opposed to a jack of hearts.
Okay. Now online, I've heard that a lot of pros are saying that horse games are so lucrative right now because the hold'em games are just getting so tough. What do you think of that? Do you think horse is eventually going to maybe become the future of poker, or do you think no limit and limit hold'em are still going to be the two monsters?
Well, I really hope that that other games of poker become the future of poker. I think that no limit hold'em becomes a little bit boring, if you will, at a certain point. It's very repetitious, and if you play all day, every single day of no limit hold'em, at some point you're going to want to be able to play a different game, a different variation of poker in a deck of cards. And so while No Limit Hold'em is it's a beautiful game in itself, I really hope that everyone at some point comes to appreciate other variations of poker. And for that reason, I think that in the future, everyone's gonna be playing all different types of versions of poker. And I hope that one day at the World Series they have like a 20 game rotation, make everyone play every single game of poker, and the best man at every version gets the bracelet. So I definitely think that No Limit Hold'em players are transitioning to other games, whether it be horse games or whether it be Pot Limit Omaha, for example. And for that reason, games are getting very lucrative in other variations of poker because people are just starting to get into it.
And it seems like players are willing to pay to learn to get better, because a lot of the big No Limit Hold'em players are playing high stakes horse, even though they might not be as competent in them, right?
Well, sometimes you have to pay to learn. Sitting with a fantastic opponent and watching what he does on a regular basis is definitely a great utility in getting better in yourself. I learned so much just playing the 50K horse event. Even though I feel like I'm very good at horse games, being able to sit with those kind of caliber of players every single day for 12-hour days. I took every opportunity I could, and I watched every single hand, and I really tried to follow the action as much as I could, because they play so well that I wanted to be able to pick up everything that they were doing and the reasons why.
All right. And online, I was wondering, of course, you can't be the best at every game. So if you have a weak game, what do players think of sitting out, like online? If you're in a horse game and Raz is your weakest game, if you sit out that round, do players get upset, or is that an ethical thing?
Yeah, it's considered very, very unethical to sit out in a game that you're not good at. And the reason for it is that, online, for instance, they have fixated horse games, so when you sit down, you have to play horse. But in live settings, for instance, games are usually started by all the players coming together and agreeing on a certain rotation of games. That's how a game usually starts. Like, someone's good at these 2 games, but they're bad at this one, and the other guy's good at these 2 games, but they're bad at those 2. So, players will come together and they'll all pick one game and they'll start it. And so if all the players come together, pick one game, and they start it, and you only play the games that you're good at, that's completely unfair to the other players. Right. And that completely goes against the reason why they started the game in the first place. So I get really upset when I see a player sit in a game and only play the games that he's good at, not the ones that he's bad at, because that is going to kill the game in itself. Because if everyone were to do that, then there'd be no game. I'm gonna sit and play this guy at Omaha because that's the only game he's good at, but he's not gonna play Raz or something. Mm-hmm. And then so I'm gonna sit out there in Omaha, and then the game's gonna disintegrate.
And it also takes up a seat at the game too, when someone else could be sitting there playing that game.
Yeah.
But you mentioned online. You said that you have to play horse, but do players get kicked off if they sit out a certain game, or do they get banned, or is there anything that reprimands people for doing that online?
There really isn't much to stop people from doing it, and I really hope that in the future policies will be created to to preventing people from doing that. Most of the time, in most rotations, people like to rotate the games every 8 hands. So, you play your 8 hands and you move on to the next one. And there's nothing that stops somebody, as you said, from sitting out during the 8 hands. Some places like to rotate games every half hour. But, if you have a 5-game rotation, it takes 2.5 hours to play through the rotation. And some people are only going to sit down and play an hour and a half. So, tournaments are great because obviously, in the horse event, for instance, if you sit out during one game, you're going to get blinded off. So, in the future, I think that they should try to create policies that force you to get blinded off if you sit out.
Okay, so besides yourself, who do you think is the best horse player you've ever seen?
The best horse player that I've ever seen? Well, I would have to say that I give all the props in the world to guys like Phil Ivey, David Benjamin, David Oppenheim. I feel bad leaving out any names, who deserve to be credited as the greatest horse players in the world. But those three come to mind as people who I really respect.
Did anybody help you?
Did anybody help me become better at horse?
Like mentor you, or did you is this all your talent at H.O.R.S.E? Is just all your research and play and experience? I've
had a lot of experience discussing poker topics with other people, and to all those people who I've discussed things over time, they've really come to help me, and that's huge for people who want to get better at games. It's really hard to learn everything on your own. You really could use some assistance, and that's why books are created and online resources. It's really great if you can learn what somebody else has spent, so many years learning on their own. But at some point, when you reach a certain level, nobody wants to teach you anymore. I don't. For quite a while, I've basically had to learn everything on my own. I don't really talk that much poker with people, and I love to teach. I just haven't had that much opportunity in the past couple of years to do so. I'm hoping in the future to be able to do that. I actually taught my my girlfriend how to play poker. Her name's Erica Trank, and nobody's heard of her because she hasn't hit the scene yet. But she's really good. She beats 5-10 no limit hold'em, and I think she's gonna hit the scene. So.
That's awesome. Well, I was going to say...
Teaching is fulfilling for me for that reason.
I was just going to say, maybe you could teach me how to play horse, and I can maybe be playing in the 50K horse event in next 2009 World Series.
Well, I really hope that you're going to be able to.
Crazy.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? Is that a dream of yours?
Absolutely.
Well, then I hope you can live out your dream. That'd be cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming by today.
Well, thank you for having me, Christy.
All right. I'm Christy Arnett with Michael DeMichele for Card Player TV.